Archbishop of Cape Town, Thabo Makgoba, presided over Archbishop Emeritus Desmond Tutu's birthday Eucharist service last week, focusing on Tutu's legacy and contribution to the country. With the local government elections a few weeks away now and political parties vying for your vote, we touch base with Archbishop Makgoba on some of the social ills confronting our country. In fact, he joins us now via our video link. Archbishop Makgoba, it's great to see you this morning. Thanks very much for joining us here on the AM Report. And wow, what an incredible week it was last week with the Arch turning 90 years old.
Indeed, thank you so much, Michelle. And I'm still pinching myself and say, wow, he has, in terms of a biblical age of 10,
wow.
He has surpassed that, and he's still in his element. So we are grateful to God for his life.
Yeah, we are grateful indeed. And we miss him, don't we? We miss him in the social discourse of our country. We miss his voice.
We do miss his voice, and as his birthday has indicated last week, the radicalism of his message, although, as someone has said, we've tended to domesticate that message, but his message is quite radical, and in his message throughout, he has advocated for proper restitution, and we know in South Africa after TRC there hasn't been any restitution in land redistribution or resource redistribution, as he says in his message about the wealth tax, as just two examples.
Yeah. In preparing for his Eucharist service last week, Archbishop Makgoba, you know, that must have been quite a task for you. How do you begin to reflect on a life like the Arch's?
Michelle, it's, there's a phrase in the African indigenous knowledge system. They say the road is made by walking it. And there were a number of people that were reflecting from his and Mama Leah's Peace Center, from the cathedral, and from what we call our liturgists. And the tiny little advantage that I have is I have journeyed with the Arch since I was his ordinate before he sent me to college in 1987. So I've known him, I know the hymns he likes, I know the type of prayers and liturgy he likes. But it was a collaborative effort, which I am glad it gave worth to God, and it acknowledged the Emeritus Archbishop during that service.
Yeah, and it's so ironic as you talk to us about, you know, the powerful voice of the Arch that we miss in South Africa and around the world. His 90th birthday takes place in the run-up to what is a hotly contested local government election. Our analysts here on the show tell us that cynicism and voter apathy and broken promises are the order of the day in the run-up to the 1st of November.
Indeed. And I think if one traces the Arch's voice from the 1970s, when Africa's nations were starting to be independent, right from the beginning then, he saw the thread, maybe thin, but a permanent thread of corruption. And with corruption comes cynicism, it comes pulling the other down. You know, I read a book a couple of years ago written by an equivalent of our public projector in Kenya. He wrote a book, It Is Our Turn to Eat. And I think the contestation, sadly, is not about serving the common good, as Arch will say. It is not seeing that every South African is made in the image of God and reflects God. But the contestation is about, it is my turn to eat, and I will block any other person so that I could have my hand in the public purse. And I think that must pay him a great deal.
Yeah, yeah. Corruption certainly is one of the biggest challenges facing our country, as is racism. You know, we saw it playing out. I mean, we see it playing out every single day, and there are particular issues. You know, when we think of the civil unrest back in July, there's that particular community of Phoenix in Durban where racial tensions were stoked once again in the wake of that civil unrest. It's an ongoing issue, not just in Phoenix, in Durban, in our country, for our country.
Michelle, certainly it is. You know, I was looking at, somebody sent me a little snippet of the voting at the United Nations when they voted that something has to be done with discrimination and racism.
Yeah.
And the majority of member states with voting power voted yes. And I was shocked when I looked at those that abstained and voted no. And those whose constitution are democratic, those who are supposed to be somehow the holders of these democratic processes. But coming back at home, I think the and I and a number of South Africans, and I hope including you and your listeners, and including those that may be throwing this racist attitude to the others, should remember his beautiful model of saying, we are all yellow, pink, red, short, long noses, or short noses, short, tall. We are all made in the image of God, and we reflect the spark of the divine. So in that economy, racism has no place. It actually betrays a God. And I remember him saying, it is actually blasphemous, because if you demean the other, you demean the God in you and you demean yourself. So we cannot tolerate racism in South Africa today and in the world.
And I'm glad you talked about discrimination and racism as you addressed that question, Archbishop Makgoba. You know, the church, religious and faith-based organizations have always played an incredibly important role in our democracy. What is the role of faith-based organizations in addressing such an issue, discrimination and racism?
Michelle, we don't have an option, because whether you're a Christian, whether you're a Muslim, a Jew, a Baha'i, African indigenous believer, a person of faith or no faith, in our polity, in our sacred scriptures, discrimination and racism is not tolerated. And drinking from the Christian sacred scripture, we say, in Christ there is no east or west, there is no Jew nor Gentile. The master becomes the servant of all. And so, just to give one tangible example, within the Anglican Church, I was preaching at the diocesan school here in Cape Town yesterday during the confirmation for the students, and I spoke about the commission that I have set up on behalf of the Anglican Church to look at racism and discrimination in Anglican schools, and we've chosen both words, concept, discrimination and racism, because discrimination can discriminate you on the basis of whether you're a woman and you don't get elected as an archbishop or a bishop. It can discriminate on the basis of your sexuality, which you don't have the choice to change it. You can be discriminated and be bullied for all sorts of things. So the two go hand in hand, Michelle, and they must be tackled in South Africa.
Archbishop Makgoba, as we wrap up our discussion with you this morning, we're just 3 weeks away now from the local government elections. You and I have, in our discussion this morning, talked about a whole range of challenges still facing our country: poverty, unemployment, corruption, and the list goes on, not least of which it happens in the context of a global health crisis in terms of COVID-19. What are your hopes for these local government elections as politicians make all sorts of promises on the campaign trail?
My hope, first and foremost, Michelle, is I am an Anglican Archbishop and I have been vaccinated, and our synod has passed a radical resolution to say it is urging that vaccination for all our clergy should be compulsory. Of course, we know that some for medical reasons want, and we urge all Anglicans laity that for the common good, please do consider vaccinating. And I just want to say to our politicians, my prayer is your campaigning and your electioneering will not further polarize South Africa. And that you need to remember that we are on the same side, we are on the winning team. Let's make South Africa win. And please, let's not make these campaigning and electioneering super spreaders. We have lost loved ones, we have lost dear ones due to this pandemic. So that is the first thing. But the second thing is, please don't give false hope. South Africa is only around 25 years in its democratic dispensation. Let us not deal with superficiality. Let's look at where the rubber hits the road. Let's look at things like the economic structuring of the world in South Africa. It is surely not working because the poor are getting poorer and the rich are getting filthy rich. So can we really look at what really hits the road? And of course, I was in Makanda the other day. Besides load shedding, there was aqua sharing. I was having my bath or little shower every second day. For goodness sake, let us serve the poorest of the poor. Let us root out corruption. South Africa is a beautiful country, and let us continue on that trajectory to make it a winning country for the good of all, as Archbishop Emeritus would say, those that reflect the spark of God who has created them.
Archbishop Thabo Makgoba, it's been a great pleasure talking to you this morning. Thank you so much for joining us here on the AM Report.